Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we jump into today's conversation, a special thanks to PM Power Consulting for encouraging and supporting this show right from the start. With over 1,000 person-years of collective experience, PM Power has helped many organizations, teams, and individuals chart out their own journeys of excellence and make progress. Thank you, PM Power. Now, let's move to today's episode. My guest today is Tyler Wells, co-founder of BrainGrid. Tyler recounts 25 plus years in software, from an early IBM XT to work across military communications, startups, Skype, then Microsoft, and 7.5 years at Twilio, building video and SRE organizations before founding Propel Data, which then led to BrainGrid. He describes an experiment-driven approach to building high-performance systems by defining hypotheses, creating a steel thread MVP, and prioritizing observability for, let's say, the 2 a.m. incidents. He discusses how AI coding shifts focus from typing code to architecture, documentation, critical thinking, and red teaming plans, while warning that agents need guidance on separation of concerns and the DRY principles to avoid refactoring side effects. BrainGrid emerged from using cursor agents during Propel's wind down and aims to generate detailed specs, acceptance criteria, and validation loops so agents implement features reliably with attention to token efficiency. He also covers co-founder traits, chaos engineering, compliance challenges for solopreneurs, career advice, and staying grounded through exercise, cooking, and family. Listen on. Hi, Tyler. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Like we always do, we'll start with your origin story, how you got associated with IT, and what are the things that you've been doing, and then we'll take it from
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely do that. So I've been in this business for probably north of 25 years now. I think like a lot of people started very young, with my first IBM XT that was luckily purchased for me by my parents, many, many decades ago. And I think that started the curiosity from there, by tinkering, hacking around, and figuring out what I could do, what I could build, and that's only grown over the decades, and is probably even more so in today's climate, and the things that we're able to do. I started probably around in my professional career around 21, 22. I've worked in a number of different types of companies, everything from military communications satellites to very small startups to large companies like Skype, where I eventually got acquired by Microsoft. I spent 7.5 years at Twilio, building out the entire video organization and SRE organization, and getting to start multiple offices all over the world. And then I took the journey back into building my own company in 21. That started with a company called Propel Data. Obviously, that didn't go exactly as I wanted. We didn't find product market fit, and started BrainGrid the beginning of last year. And I've been working on that ever since.
Wonderful. So some of the things that you said you worked on, like whether it's military communications or Skype and things like that, are all high performance and catering to a wide variety of environments.
Yep.
So how do you even conceive of what will work or what we should build for?
Well, I always think everything is going to work with a long enough time horizon. You're going to figure it out. The degree of difficulty depends on what it is you're trying to build. But when I think about a problem, I try to break it down into its sort of simplest parts. And what are the sort of starting at the base? What are the things that I need in order for whatever it is I'm building to be true? And I kind of come up with that steel thread or that MVP just to prove that what it is that we want to do is potentially capable. For instance, when we started Propel Data, the original concept or the original idea that we were building upon was something that my teams and organization built out at Twilio. It was built on an entirely different technology. It was built for a kind of single purpose, and we felt that could be turned into a platform. But when we wanted to turn that into a platform, we wanted to choose an entirely different storage medium. In this case, the previous one was Elasticsearch, and we wanted to use ClickHouse. Myself and my co-founder had never worked with it, but we had very strong indications from our own research that that would be a great foundation to start on. And so we just started building the steel thread. What is the simplest thing that we could build to essentially prove our hypothesis? And so a lot of what we do and a lot of what I've done is if you treat everything sort of as an experiment, well, you form a hypothesis and what has to be true to hopefully satisfy that hypothesis. And then I start building it. And we kind of build that steel thread, take a step back, ask ourselves some questions. What worked? What didn't work? What could be better? What did we learn? And then we revise and start to turn that into, what is that sort of first iteration of the product that we're trying to build?
Okay. But for some of these technical products, to validate the assumptions, do you also think of instrumenting the code and then looking at what now everyone calls observability or any learnings from within the platform itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think observability and instrumentation is always first and foremost. It may not necessarily be the very first thing that I do, but it's sort of always there in the back of my mind, having operated a number of systems at scale, globally. Those are things that when you've been through enough battles and wars and 2 a.m. Incidents, those things are always sort of like in your head and you're thinking about them. And so, as you're sort of layering things on, you're asking yourself this question, and if this breaks at 2 o'clock in the morning, what is it that I need to know? What is the most important information that I can either get from the metrics or the logs that are going to point me in the right direction to understand exactly what broke and how do I fix it?
Yeah, maybe now I have to ask you, since I have this bad habit of having two classifications of programmers.
Mhm.
One, the keyboard programmers, and the other, the mouse programmers, right?
Yeah.
Now with vibe coding and all that, you're completely cut off from how it runs, or when you said the 2 a.m. calls and stuff like that. How do you even get that experience?
Well, you actually have a third set of programmers now, the voice coders.
Okay.
So, I mean, I know a lot of people these days aren't even typing or really using the mouse much anymore. They're just speaking to Claude or whoever they're using.
Mhm.
But I mean, I think you can never disentangle yourself completely.
Hmm.
You have to still even if you're allowing, Claude or Gemini or Codex to write the majority of the code. From my standpoint, I'm still going to want to understand what it's doing and how it's working.
Hmm.
So a lot of times when I'm doing those things, I will have it create architecture diagrams, create user flows, create a lot of, I would say, human consumable documentation
Mhm.
that can be used for new engineers, but can also be used for other, bringing on other people with their agents so they can get up to speed. I think if you don't understand the systems, you're going to have quite a difficult time fixing things when things break, and they will definitely break. There's only so much you can do without having some level of understanding or spending probably just as much time, if not more time, trying to, are you going to build like another agent to essentially act as that SRE? And that's both good and bad.
So for the AI world,
Mhm.
do we need to look at a different way of either training people or thinking about how to build systems?
Yeah, I mean, I've had to kind of retrain my mind, in a sense. I mean, I grew up in the era of, you had to figure out the best framework, you had to do the research, you had to sit back and design, think deeply of how to design these systems in the most, sort of efficient manner, reusable manner. And then you had to actually implement it character by character, line by line. You don't necessarily have to do that anymore. And that's not something when I think about the actual implementation and writing character by character, line by line, I don't anymore. Like that's completely gone from my mind. Now it's more, I have this conversation with the agent and then get the context built to a place where I'm comfortable with the design, I'm comfortable with the architecture. I've poked holes in it. I've in a sense asked hard questions, and I kind of treat those agents as if as a peer, so to speak, because they're the ones that are going to be doing the implementation, but I still want to understand how and why some of the decisions are being made. So, I mean, the one thing that using the agents doesn't take away is obviously the side of human creativity, but also that ability to critically think about what's being produced.
So from being a technical person,
Mhm.
uh, how did the startup bug bite you?
Oh, I mean, I think I've always wanted to have my own company, and I've always wanted to be able to build things. I've always been a builder. I mean, even when I was, a VP of engineering or senior director of engineering with, hundreds of people below me, I was still coding. During some of those times, maybe I wasn't necessarily building things for production, but I've always been somebody that likes to build.
Okay.
And so, for me, sort of the next step there as a builder is, you know, I want to go build something. So I want to go create something. And I think the obvious choice for me was let's go create a company. Let's go create software platform, something that solves a problem. And, that's, always continues to pique my curiosity and drive my curiosity by, what more can I do? What more can I build? Can I build something that is actually going to help people solve problems, in maybe a new and novel way?
But then running a company also involves other things that are beyond just the technical stuff, whether it's running
Many other things,
people.
a ton of other things. Yes.
Yeah. So how did you get comfortable with that?
I mean, I don't know if I'm ever truly comfortable. I mean, I think, there's always growth and pain that comes from that.
Mm.
But it's like any other problem you have to solve, you've got to dig in and understand it and then figure out how to solve it. So things like marketing, things like go-to-market motion, things like pricing, um, all of those things, just running the business, dealing with taxes, dealing with payroll, dealing with HR, all that, you just figure it out. And so, it's like any problem, there is a solution for it. And, you've got to put in the time and the effort to learn it, even if it's something that you're not necessarily, I've never done that before. Well, go figure it out. We used to say at Twilio, go draw the owl. And so, you kind of dig in and figure it out and you learn from others, you ask questions. And then the boring stuff, you try to automate it so you don't have to deal with it.
So in doing that, what is the contribution or the role of a co-founder?
Everything. I mean, the simplest way to put it in there is you're going to do everything. So you're going to do, my day may look like I get up in the morning, deal with any issues that may have happened overnight, fix those, send the agents off to build new features, review inbound support emails, look at, is there any administrative work that has to be done? So you kind of have to wear a lot of different hats. And you have to do that all the time, and you have to be able to context switch all the time. You may be coding, you may have been spent 2 hours coding, and then you get pulled into a sales meeting or a marketing meeting, or you've got to completely think about, hey, now we've got to redesign a new part of the product, and what is that going to look like? So, you have to be able to sort of be very agile and context switch, at a moment's notice.
Yeah. No, my question was more on the need or the benefit of having a co-founder.
Oh, the benefit of having a co-founder? Well, I mean, you need a partner in this. I think trying to run this solo, I mean, there's people that do, but are they really solo? I mean, they're sort of standing up, seconds, firsts and seconds, and having other people there to then, manage the pieces that they shouldn't be managing or do the things that they shouldn't be doing. The benefit of having a co-founder is, someone else is in the trenches with you, someone else with the same level of drive, the same level of passion that, shares that sort of core fundamental of wanting to build something that didn't exist before.
So is that the quality one should look for when looking for a co-founder?
I mean, I think it's one of them. I think one of the qualities are, they've got to be passionate about what you're doing. They've got to be tireless in the pursuit of excellence. They have to have the grit and the determination to not give up. Very few companies, are overnight successes. I think, the average tenure for a company to be successful is somewhere between 7 and 10 years. Obviously, in the AI age, some of that has changed. So you've seen like the Lovables and a few other of those, and Cursor, show up, throw up these massive numbers in less than a year. But those are like the double unicorns, like the things that you never see in nature. And there's, for every one of those cursors, there's thousands, that don't make it or take 7 years to find some product market fit. So, when I look at what makes the ideal co-founder, obviously all of those things that I said, they need to be somebody you can work with. You're going to spend more time with that co-founder than you're probably going to spend with your own family, for a number of years. They've got to be somebody that challenges you in the right way. They've got to be somebody that is going to stand by you as a bad decision is made, and how do we correct that? So yeah, I think, those are some of the traits that I would think about and look for.
So before we get into brain grid, I was curious about one of the things that was mentioned in your profile, which said you love chaos theory.
Yeah, I mean,
how did that come about, and then how do you apply that?
yeah, I mean, it sort of came about by managing systems and people at the same time. Systems may be slightly less chaos than people at times, but the chaos and application of chaos to your systems, especially, will help you deal with and root out issues before your customers are finding them. So there was a company called Gremlin. They're still around. I think their co-founder or founder was at Amazon, and I think he was the one that actually coined that term as he was sort of developing the mental models for SRE and injecting chaos into systems to sort of battle harden those systems. And it was something that sort of stuck with me as I was building out, my organizations inside of Twilio. As we were scaling those systems, watching more and more users come on, it was like, the worst thing is for your customer to find an issue that you didn't find, that you didn't know about. And, you get that email of like, hey, I just did this and now nothing works. I want to be able to find all those as much as I can before I've even put that out into production. And then I've got to continuously find those as the systems evolve and they change and everything else like that. So I think injecting your own chaos, into your systems to test those, is a very good thing to do. especially as more and more of these systems are being built from agents and not humans.
Mm.
But the agents are very good at testing the slop that they've written. So, which hopefully is not slop.
Yeah. So, with your experience, even though the technology is changing, maybe the way you approach developing systems, the tools you use, and so on, do you see any evergreen patterns or patterns that are kind of becoming in vogue again?
I don't know, that's hard to say. Nothing that's necessarily standing out right now. I also don't think I've thought about it that deeply.
Hmm.
Um, the main the main patterns are sort of, I don't know. I don't know if I have a great answer for that right now. Um,
Yeah, one thing which when I, after a long break, try to get back into coding, I find that even though the tools have changed, the basic principles of whether it is data structures or algorithms or looking at cohesion and coupling when you design distributed systems, uh, maybe the terminology used is different, but then those seem to be valid, whatever is the new platform that you use.
yeah, I mean, I don't think those are going to change much. I mean, obviously they're going to be slightly evolve over time. I mean, I guess if you've jumped back in, I mean, what are some of the patterns that you've recognized of like, oh, yeah, I've done this before. Is there anything that's maybe stands out for you?
Yeah, many of them, like I said, this whole contract-driven or API-based development is basically a discipline of, first making sure your intent is there, separate the data from the algorithms and the persistence and things that you need to do. Uh,
Yeah, and I mean, I think 100% those still stand true, but I think where you have to be careful now is if when you're letting the agents build that for you, so you've given the agent some prompt to go out and complete something, they don't all, if you're not also instructing them on sort of clean separation of concerns,
yeah,
how you want these things laid out, they don't necessarily care. So
exactly.
for them, they're just going to make it work. So you've given them a directive, they're going to go build it,
Yeah.
based upon their training, which is both on good code and bad code. And if you're not instructing them on clean architectural practices, you're going to end up in some very interesting places. So, you're going to end up with, business logic in your front end where that should be
Mm.
pushed to the back end. And if you're a new developer and these are concepts that maybe you're not necessarily aware of
Mm.
or you've not learned them, you're going to end up with a system that's going to be relatively difficult to maintain.
Mm.
Now, a question that sometimes I go back to is that difficult to maintain for humans or is it difficult to maintain for the agents? Because the agents wrote it, are they going to be confused about the sort of maybe bad principles that they've created out there?
Mm.
I don't know. It kind of remains to be seen. I mean, what I have found is if your agents, for instance, are not following dry principles,
Mm.
and say, for instance, you have a component that the agent ends up recreating 3 or 4 times in 4 or 5 different places inside of your page, eventually it will get itself confused.
Yeah.
And you will have to unwind that. Or that agent will say, like, well, that component's the same. Let me go change it there. And you're like, well, that's not the one I want to change. And then you take a step back and you ask the agent, well, how many implementations of said component do you have? And it's like, well, 5. Well, why do I have 5 of them? It's like,
Yeah.
there's no reason for that. Like, consolidate that. And then, I should change it once and once only. And if there needs to be, permutations or slight changes, okay, add parameters.
Because something's, at least I experienced was that whenever you want to refactor something, there are a lot of side effects, particularly the agent generated code. So what are some good practices to have some guardrails around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is do your planning ahead. Um, Anytime you sit down and you think, oh, this is going to be a simple change, A lot of times it's not. As we know, it's like, oh, hey, I want to change this, drop down to something else. Well, what are the knock-on effects of that? Well, my data model won't support that. Oh, but it's just a simple UI change. Well, actually, it's not. That has to flow all the way through the API down to the data model, and I've got to do a migrate. It's not like that. So, the practices that I try to follow as best as possible is do a lot of planning up front, really understand what the agent is going to do. Ask the agent hard questions, challenge the agent. An approach that I've really liked is, especially if I'm doing something that potentially has security implications or is a relatively complex change, I'll ask it to red team it. So I'll ask it to take an adversarial approach to the design that it came up with and the plan that it came up with to poke holes into it. And it's literally as simple as like, okay, you came up with a plan, now go red team that plan and attack it. And let's see what comes out of that. And I found those to be very successful in the ability to then generate a solid implementation that tends to cover a lot of the corner cases.
So what was the trigger for brain grid, or what is the value proposition of brain grid?
Yeah, I can start with the trigger. The trigger was in the end of 2024, as we were shutting down Propel. We obviously had to cut headcount to try to see if we could still continue to make it viable. So when we cut headcount, we still had features we need to ship and product we had to support. And in order to stay ahead and continue to do that, we started using Cursor quite a bit. And that was the early days of Cursor when you had the autocomplete and you're kind of like, okay, well, this is neat, but it's not really going to give me that 10, 20x efficiency gain. And then agents started coming on. And the early form of the agents didn't necessarily give you the best results. They tended to wander off into areas that you didn't ask them to. They tended to refactor things that you never asked them to, and that was causing a lot of problems. And so as myself and my co-founder were sort of like trying to figure out how to like tame these things, we kind of fell back to the 20 plus years of software development life cycle, and let's start writing specs. Like, actually, not us write the specs. Like, let's get these agents to actually write the specs for the code that they're going to change, because planning mode didn't exist then. There weren't even tasks. And so we would ask the agent to write these very detailed specs and then break those specs down into smaller chunks, atomic chunks that can be implemented by the agents. And we started seeing we were getting much better quality of implementation and much better quality of code. And so after we, done a few rounds of that, and we're maintaining all these markdown files and whatever else inside of the repo, we're like, there's got to be a better way to manage this. Like this doesn't work. And so then we came up with like, well, this should just be a platform. Like, let's build a platform that we can take somebody's idea of what it is they want to build, whether it's a feature or a full-fledged product, use our agents that we've designed, that we've built, that we have taken our 25 to, combined 45 years of product development and engineering experience, and take that idea and turn that into a really good specification that can then be given to an agent to implement it and implement it correctly. And so we built essentially the planning layer, the missing planning layer, and collaboration layer on top of all these agents that you could then, again, take these ideas and turn that into epics and requirements and tasks and everything else like that to give you those fundamentals that you could then ground the agent in and allow the agents to actually go build effectively and on target.
How much of a domain knowledge do these agents require?
Not much.
No.
Not much. They're pretty, I mean, they can search the web, so they can go out and they will search the web if it's something they don't have. You can provide additional documentation to it. These agents will connect to your code base and ground themselves in what is actually there and what has been written. So when that requirement is generated, it's able to pull and expand its context from not only what it's been trained upon, but from external sources as well in order to write the specification in the best possible manner.
Uh, but how do you ensure that the specification would meet all the non-functional requirements as well?
Well, we actually have it write that into the specification. So we actually have it write its own acceptance criteria, both functional and non-functional. And then we actually have other agents that upon completion of the implementation will go back and actually validate with the code by looking at the actual code and provide examples to ensure that all that acceptance criteria has been met. And if it hasn't, it's got to do another round of implementation.
Because one of the concerns that seems to be with all these agents and models is their hunger for tokens.
They will use whatever you allow it to use, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, obviously on our end, we have to cache things heavily. Anything that's going to be, reused throughout a conversation or a session, we're going to cache to optimize as much as possible. We have to manage that entire context window. We have to be able to switch between different models depending on what type of question is being asked or what it is that it's actually working on. So we as the platform try to provide as much token efficiency as we possibly can. But again, I mean, yeah, if you just take the raw API, with your API key and no constraints, I mean, it's going to eat up whatever it needs to do to satisfy that prompt or the request that you've given it.
So as an architect or a CTO, with so many moving parts, two parts to this question. One, how do you keep up to date? And second, how do you know how to mix and match, what works best?
I mean, keeping up to date is fundamentally hard right now because things are moving so fast. I think if you're following things like X, you're going to get stuck on the hype train. So I probably see more bad on there right now than I do good. And so you have to really sort of weed through it to figure out like what is real and what is just hype. I mean, if you were to read X and just take it verbatim, essentially what that would tell you is anybody today could build a 100K MRR business, no problem, with just 5 agents that are running the entire business themselves. I don't think there's a lot of reality in that. I'm sure somebody could prove me wrong, but I think that's few and far between of people that are actually doing that. And then in terms of staying up to date on some of the tech, it's, we used to switch back and forth between, the different foundation providers. Like I would be using Gemini for one thing, I might be using Codex for something else. But I've gotten to the point now that, Opus 4.6 and Claude is just so good. I really don't go outside of that very often anymore. I will use things like Codex to validate a plan for me or sort of take an adversarial approach to something that I'm doing so I can get sort of another opinion. But really, I haven't felt the need to go outside of it. And then as far as frameworks and everything else, I don't know if it necessarily matters anymore. Whether it's Next.js or Golang or Python, it's sort of like, choose your poison and just go with it. And, the agents are going to do a phenomenal job. And if a framework isn't necessarily doing something that you want, I mean, you can almost rewrite it yourself.
But what you're building is for other product managers or professionals, the developers, right? With each one having their own preferences, how do you make sure that it will still work with all those permutations and combinations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that we take an opinion upon is ensuring that we're capturing the right context and the right information, and that we're presenting it in a manner that is going to be consumable by the AI. Once that document is written, it's not set in stone. So you as a PM, you as a solopreneur, you as an engineer can then read it and change it to be whatever you want, or have a conversation with the agent to understand why it wrote something the way it wrote or why it specified something the way that it wrote. So everything is malleable. We just give you that initial foundation, I think, at a very high level of accuracy that you can then go and change to be whatever it is you want. So we don't tend to force workflows on people. We don't force like, hey, this is the only way to build. We're going to fit into the tools in whichever way you want to utilize them. So if you think MCP is the best and you want to, put the BrainGrid MCP into Codex, go ahead. Not the most token efficient way to do it, but we have that. The CLI is probably the most used, and so you can build those specifications inside of BrainGrid, open up Claude with the CLI in there, and say, okay, go build this requirement, and you're kind of hands off.
You mentioned how easy it is, or maybe I interpret it that way, to be a solopreneur.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a solopreneur supported by whatever number of agents, is there any credibility gap when it becomes a B2B or when you're trying to sell your solution to an enterprise?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to jump through all the compliance hoops. I mean, that's going to be the biggest hurdle and the one thing that everybody's going to hate. I think I've done SOC 2, I don't know, at least 4 years in a row at Propel, and I don't know how many years at Twilio, and also including HIPAA and everything else like that. I mean, the solopreneur is going to build something that maybe, solves a niche problem or does something very well that maybe the enterprise wants, and that enterprise is going to turn around and, depending on the type of data that they're giving to it, is going to start demanding, the compliance check marks. And, first and foremost, those aren't necessarily cheap. I mean, these are good things to have. I think a lot of it these days has become more of oh, I just have to do this. Let me go find the cheapest compliance provider just so I can get the checkbox and be done with it. But also at the same time, I mean, your agents are going to kind of help you get through a lot of that stuff. I mean, SOC 2 is well understood. It's well documented. There's no reason you couldn't sit down and turn an agent or multiple agents, onto your platform and say like, okay, we got to do SOC 2 compliance. Let's figure out what I need to do and what's missing here. And then, you could always jump to a platform and let it do it for you too, if you want to pay.
Plus, also, would, as an enterprise, someone bet on a solopreneur or another enterprise in terms of long-term support or upgrades and so on?
I mean, the enterprise betting on a solopreneur is going to be a pretty tough thing. That's going to be a very tough thing. I mean, I would be surprised if they wouldn't just look at that and just build it themselves. I think there's a lot of things today that you look at that you're using that's on your phone, that's maybe on your desktop that you use every day that you might be paying for, that you kind of start to sit back and ask yourself, do I want to continue to pay whatever I pay a year, a month, or do I want to use my $200 a month Claude code and just go build it myself? And I think that's going to be a hard thing for a lot of these smaller niches or quite frankly, any company these days. Obviously the news shows there's plenty of stories of, companies being tired of paying the SaaS prices, and they end up, over the course of a week or 2 weeks, just replacing it because they built it themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, I myself personally, I use an app called Strava that tracks all of my runs and exercises and everything else like that. I've been with them forever. I like them. And I use another one called Garmin that's on my watch that, that is a lot harder to replace because it's a physical device. And I was like, well, I think I can just build my own Strava. And, I turned one of my agents loose and said, hey, I want to build this, but I want it to be personalized for me. And I want it to do these things better. And it was like, oh, we can definitely do that. And here's what some of the gaps are. And here's how we can make this better. And I just said, go. And, a few hours later, the MVP was there and working. And so now I had my personalized version of the software that, I've been paying for running on my Mac Studio. And I think a lot of people will start doing more and more of that. I think, building software for yourself is vastly easier than building software that scales because you just don't care. You don't need it to. It only needs to serve you. And you can highly tailor it to exactly what it is that you want. You don't even have to know much about running it. You just tell Claude, well, just run it on my Mac and make sure my Mac's up all the time. And how can I access from my phone? Okay, it'll walk you through all of that stuff.
Yeah, coincidentally, just yesterday I wrote a little blog post on why coding in the enterprise. Is it creating tech debt or some runaway liability?
Any code being written by anybody always has the potential to create both, right? Every human on the planet that's written code has created tech debt. Every human that's committed code to main has created a potential liability. For the last 20 plus years, everything that we've done from a leadership standpoint, from an engineering management standpoint, of layering on processes after processes and tools and checks and gatekeepers and everything else like that, has been to protect the customers from the engineers that are writing code. Well, now you still need to do the same thing to protect the customers from the agents that are writing code. But the agents are writing a massive amount of more code, but you still need to have the same level of protections in there. I don't think that fundamentally changes. Now, what's protecting it is going to change. What's testing it is going to change. The gates and everything else like that will start to change over time, but you still need those things.
Yeah. So this is more of a curiosity question that I have. If agents write code and they do it based on maybe their mood today, then maybe used to have enterprise applications written in Fox Pro.
Yeah.
But now when you go to find someone who can come and fix it or even upgrade it or migrate it, right? So is such a scenario likely with agent-written code? The agents of today versus agents of maybe 2 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the upgrades, right? There's always the rate of improvement of, just look at the rate of improvement of the agent output in the last 6 to 8 months. I mean, it's just gotten vastly better and better and better. And so, you'll see a lot of people that, hey, I wrote this. I mean, we doing it ourselves. Like when I go back and look, like the other day, we completely refactored, a section of our code that was written in, March, April of last year. It was like the early foundational pieces of what BrainGrid was to define and orchestrate our agents. Now, fast forward to March of 2026 and Opus 4.6, I can turn that thing and be like, all right, we wrote this before. It's got issues. It doesn't look good. It needs to maintain, the same things that it does. Let's make this more performant. Let's make this more reliable. Go. Obviously my prompt's probably going to be longer than that and, ensure all the tests still pass and everything else like that. But I think you're constantly going to be doing that stuff. Like you would constantly do the same thing even before AI. If you found a better framework, if you found a new version of the framework, you would have to go through a cycle of upgrades. And you would have to spend the time and the effort and the testing and everything else to ensure that it's still, satisfying the requirements and meeting the acceptance criteria and is performant. But I think now that'll just happen at a much faster rate and much more efficiently.
Yeah. So with this, there are a couple of career-related questions, career tips that I would like to ask you. For two segments of people. One, someone who's considering a career in IT today, and those who are probably going through a mid-career crisis, saying, now, what do I do next? Do I stay technical? Should I become more of a manager? Or I'm not in IT. Everybody else seems to be talking IT. Should I get into IT? Not at the entry level, but is there any transferable experience that I can bring, etc.? So what would be your advice to these two segments?
Yeah, I mean, for the early in career folks, be really good at the fundamentals. be really good about thinking and design and get hyper good at utilizing the agents to implement what it is that you need to build and become very efficient at that. We're always going to need replacements, right? We're going to the people that are coming in now, are going to be replacing, me in 10 years or something like that, right? Like there's always going to be the need for, junior engineers to come in to learn, to train, to understand, and to build up their skills. Those skills are going to be augmented heavily by their ability to efficiently utilize coding agents. But they still are going to need to, today at least, understand the fundamentals of architecture and good design. They need to be able to look at something, test something, and ask the question, how bad does this smell? Is this good? Does this meet the definition of good? Can I ship this? Is this going to work? How can I get my agents to test this effectively and thoroughly? How can I inject chaos into the system to ensure that it's doing what it's supposed to do? And then I think for, people that are mid-level, have been doing this for 5, 10 years, that they've got a ton of expertise, and, they need to utilize that expertise to become exceptionally good at getting that expertise out of their heads into, a swarm of agents that are essentially implementing what it is that they want built. And they need to be able to do that efficiently. As far as the question of, do they make the leap from being an engineer to a non-coding manager? I mean, I think that's a very personal question. That's a different level of chaos that they will have to deal with. Um, you know, uh, Organizational design and dealing with the human resources and people is a different type of problem. And if somebody has the leadership capabilities and that's something that they want to do, they're going to be needed. They get to play the adult in the room.
We covered a lot of ground, Tyler, and thanks a lot for that. But there's still one more question that I have for you,
Sure.
which is, do you have any personal practices that help you stay grounded among all the chaos around?
Let's see. Personal practices, exercise, I think is first and foremost. Not only obviously you're working the mind every day with coding, designing, building, running a company, but the body needs, the body needs it as well. So I look at the body as an engine. That engine needs to run. If you think of a car that just sits idle, in your driveway and you never turn it on, well, after a couple of months, it's probably not going to turn on. So I think, first and foremost for me is exercise that gets me away from the computer, that gets me either out into nature, or gets me doing something that is healthy, that's not just building. Um, the other things are, obviously hobbies outside of the day-to-day, coding and everything else like that. So, for me, I like to cook. I cook for my family a lot. I cook for friends. Obviously, I'm in Texas, so I do a lot of barbecue, a lot of smoking of meats. So that helps. That's a nice break, and it still sort of scratches that analytical mind, because obviously cooking is it's an algorithm, right? you, you follow steps. You've got to put things together, and then you learn how to hack it and everything else like that. So I enjoy those sorts of things. And then, for me, is family. So spending as much time as I can with, my wife and kids. I wish there was more. I would say there would be another one, which would be reading. I wish I had the opportunity to read more. That's sort of fallen on the wayside, as things have cranked up with Brain Grid. So now, I get my podcasts or my reading in when I'm either on the treadmill or out for a run.
And you have your own podcast as well, right?
I did. I did that for a number of years during my time at Propel. It's called Data Chaos. It tried to focus more on the technical aspects of, how chaotic data can be and data inside of enterprises and companies. But I actually stopped doing that a while ago. So I haven't released any new episodes in a bit.
On that note, thanks a lot, Tyler, for
Yeah.
the time sharing your story, sharing your experience and your perspectives.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And thank you for having me on your show.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.